Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental, how our brains actually build knowledge.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We've got a fascinating collection of sources here, all diving into, well, the science of learning.
A whole range of stuff, articles, research papers.
Think of this as your shortcut, to understanding the core principles behind how you learn, moving past just intuition to solid evidence-based insights.
Exactly. We've dug through research from, well, a lot of different scientific fields, all trying to understand this amazing process,
Our mission today.
to pull out the key ideas, the really important bits, and give you a clearer picture of this, frankly, complex area.
And why should you, our listener, care? Maybe you're prepping for a meeting or trying to get up to speed in a new field. Maybe you're just curious.
Right.
Why tune in? Well, because understanding the science behind effective learning, it's like finding a hidden key, isn't it?
It really is, to unlock your own brain's potential.
It gives you that direct path to strategies that actually work based on how our brains are well wired.
Okay, let's jump right in then.
Yeah.
So learning, at its most basic level, it's just how experiences lead to fairly permanent changes.
Changes in what we know, what skills we have.
Even how we behave, yeah. But the science of learning, or SOL, as it's sometimes called, that's where it gets really interesting.
It's a newer field, relatively speaking.
And it brings together ideas from, gosh, a whole bunch of different places.
Like neuroscience, looking at the brain itself.
Cognitive psychology, how we think.
Developmental psychology, how learning changes over our lives.
Yep. And then education research, genetics, even sociology, anthropology.
And machine learning is playing a bigger role now too, right?
Increasingly so, yeah. They all contribute pieces to the puzzle.
And the main goal of putting all this together
Is to really, truly understand the mechanisms, how learning happens, not just in kids, but across our entire lifespan,
and the ultimate goal.
is translating those discoveries into things that work in the real world. Better teaching, smarter education policies.
And even just better ways for each of us, personally, to learn things.
Exactly.
Now, because it's such a fast-moving field, you hear different names, don't you?
Oh, yeah. You might hear educational neuroscience or neuroeducation.
Mind, brain, and education, MBE.
Learning sciences.
Mm.
They can feel a bit like alphabet soup sometimes.
So why all the different terms?
Well, kind of shows the field's diverse roots,
Mm.
where it came from, different groups coming together.
Makes sense.
But it does mean the exact focus can sometimes be a little fuzzy.
How so?
Some definitions lean more towards cognitive science, others more towards the neuroscience side, and some try to be really broad and include social factors too.
So for us trying to make sense of it, what's the takeaway?
It just means we need to be thoughtful, I think, especially when translating findings.
From the lab to the classroom, for example.
Precisely. We can't oversimplify. Can't just jump to conclusions about what some, say, brain scan study really means for teaching practice.
Right, there's a risk of misinterpreting things.
Definitely. Without a universally agreed definition, it's easier to misunderstand the implications. That's why that cross-disciplinary chat is so vital.
Okay, so we have the landscape, but let's get to the core. Why is understanding the brain itself so crucial for understanding learning?
Well, the fundamental idea is actually quite simple, but really powerful.
Which is?
Learning physically changes your brain.
Ah.
Every new thing you learn, every skill you practice, it leaves a mark. It alters connections between your brain cells, the neurons, changes how active they are.
And that's neuroplasticity, isn't it? That famous concept.
That's the one. The brain's amazing ability to reshape itself is not fixed.
It's constantly being molded by what we do, what we experience.
Exactly. And if we understand how neurons connect, communicate, and reorganize, well, that gives us a lens
A lens for what?
for designing learning experiences that actually work with the brain's natural processes, not against them.
And this scientific approach, it sometimes challenges older ideas about teaching, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. The science of learning acts as a kind of evidence-based counterpoint to, well, common sense beliefs or traditions in education that aren't always accurate.
Like what?
Well, cognitive science research, for example, gives us really strong evidence for strategies like retrieval practice, actively recalling information.
Like testing yourself.
Exactly. And spacing out your learning over time, those are super effective.
And what about just rereading your notes over and over?
Yeah, turns out not so much. Much less effective than active recall.
And the science of learning also helps bust those neuromyths, right? Those
Yeah.
popular but wrong ideas about the brain.
Definitely. Things like rigid learning styles,
Mhm.
The idea you're only a visual learner or
We've
whatever.
read that we only use 10% of our brain.
That old chestnut. Yeah. These myths can actually be harmful if they lead educators down the wrong path.
And learning isn't just this cold cognitive thing happening in isolation, is it?
No, that's a crucial point. It's deeply intertwined with our emotions, our social world, our environment.
How we feel affects how we learn.
Hugely. Research shows our emotional state significantly impacts attention, memory. What we pay attention to, what sticks,
Makes sense.
and even things like self-regulation, controlling our impulses. Those skills are linked in the brain to knowledge acquisition networks.
So this really backs up that idea of a whole child approach in schools.
It absolutely does. Recognizing that well-being, emotional state, and learning are inseparable.
So effective learning environments need to think about more than just academics.
Yes. Fostering positive relationships, emotional safety, addressing social emotional needs, it's all part of the picture. Ignoring that stuff means ignoring some fundamental conditions for optimal learning.
So grounding education in this science gives it a stronger foundation.
A much more robust foundation, yeah.
Yeah.
For teacher professionalism, for effective methods.
Okay, let's dive into the brain itself then, the architecture. If we want to build knowledge, we need to know the key players, right?
Exactly. And it's not just one part doing everything. It's this coordinated dance across many brain regions, intricate networks.
Right. Let's start with a big one, the hippocampus. We hear that name a lot with memory. Where is it? What's its job?
So the hippocampus, it's tucked away deep inside the temporal lobe. And yeah, it's absolutely vital for forming new declarative memories.
Declarative, meaning
Meaning facts like the capital of France. That's semantic memory. And personal events, remember your breakfast this morning, that's episodic memory. The what and when and where.
so it captures that kind of information initially.
Think of it as a crucial initial hub. It helps take short-term memories and start the process of making them long-term. Organizing, storing, helping us retrieve them later.
The brain's librarian, almost. Or maybe the inbox.
Something like that. And it's heavily involved in memory consolidation, stabilizing memories over time.
Especially during sleep, right?
Yes, it seems to work closely with the neocortex, particularly during sleep, to make memories more permanent.
What else does it do?
It's also key for spatial memory navigation, learning routes, and encoding the sequence of events in an experience, binding all the elements together. Context, exactly. Who, what, where, and maybe even helps us forget older stuff, though that's less clear.
And it's unique because new neurons can grow there, even in adults.
That's right, adult neurogenesis. It's one of the few places that happens robustly, adding to its plasticity. It gets lots of input, talks to the amygdala about emotions and memory, talks to the prefrontal cortex for retrieval. It's a busy place.
And sensitive.
Very sensitive to stress, to cortisol, and things like poor diet can impact it too.
Okay, next player, the amygdala, usually linked with emotions.
Spot on. It's that almond-shaped structure, also in the temporal lobe, the brain's emotion center, especially for fear and threat detection.
How does that relate to learning?
It's crucial for emotional learning, associating things with rewards or punishments, like learning to be wary of a hot stove.
Okay.
And it strongly influences memory in general, especially emotional memories. It talks to the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex to sort of flag important emotionally charged events for better encoding and consolidation. Makes them stick.
Survival mechanism, maybe?
Likely, yeah. It's also involved in reading social cues and that famous fight or flight response.
The amygdala hijack.
Exactly. But chronic stress can actually make it overactive and change its structure, which isn't good.
Right. And then there's the big boss at the front, the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
The command center.
Yeah.
Right at the front. It's the seat of our executive functions.
Executive functions,
Like working memory, holding stuff in mind, planning, decision-making, attention control, being mentally flexible, stopping yourself from doing something impulsive.
Emotional regulation, too.
Yep, that too. It's basically responsible for goal-directed behavior. Different parts handle slightly different jobs, but overall, it's about cognitive control
Guiding our thoughts and actions.
based on our goals and the current situation. It also helps when we're consciously trying to retrieve a memory, and it develops late, right?
Yeah, well into our early 20s, which explains a lot about teenagers sometimes.
Doesn't it just? And like the hippocampus, it's also vulnerable to chronic stress.
Okay, moving back. The neocortex. That sounds important.
Hugely important. It's that big, wrinkly outer layer, responsible for all the complex stuff, perception, movement, language, conscious thought.
And memory storage.
It's the primary repository for long-term knowledge, especially those declarative memories once they're consolidated.
So memories move from the hippocampus to the neocortex over time.
That's the idea behind systems consolidation.
Yeah.
A gradual transfer,
Yeah.
and different parts specialize visual stuff at the back, auditory on the sides, spatial awareness up top.
And conceptual knowledge is spread out across it.
Seems to be represented in distributed networks across sensory, motor, and association areas.
What about the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, often linked to movement?
True, but crucial for learning, too.
Mhm.
The basal ganglia deep structures are paramount for procedural memory.
Skills and habits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learning to ride a bike, type, play an instrument, automating things, it involves dopamine, reward learning.
And the cerebellum. At the back.
Traditionally, coordination and balance, yes, but also vital for procedural learning. Fine-tuning motor skills, learning timed sequences, helps automate skills. There's even evidence for its role in cognitive procedural learning.
Wow. So it really is a network affair, all these parts talking.
Absolutely. Structures like the hippocampus and PFC are involved in multiple processes. Learning isn't neat boxes. It emerges from this dynamic interplay.
And we have different types of memory systems interacting too.
Right. The declarative system, reliant on the hippocampus for facts and events, and the procedural system, reliant on basal ganglia and cerebellum for skills.
And they work together.
Often, yes. Learning a complex skill might start declaratively consciously learning the steps, then become procedural, automatic with practice.
Okay, we have the structures. How does the information actually, flow between them? What's the communication system?
Right. So learning fundamentally involves changes in the brain's communication network. Billions of neurons.
Brain cells.
Exactly. And they talk to each other across tiny gaps called synapses.
How does that work again? Basic level.
Neurons send electrical signals action potentials. When a signal reaches the end of a neuron, it releases chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, into the synapse.
Okay.
These chemicals cross the gap, bind to the next neuron, and can trigger a signal in that one.
And learning changes these connections.
That's the key. The strength and efficiency of these synaptic connections can change. Stronger connections mean one neuron is more likely to make the next one fire.
So memories aren't like files on a computer stored in one spot?
Not really, no. They're more like patterns of activity distributed across vast networks of neurons, often spanning multiple brain regions.
Like the apple example.
Yeah, remembering an apple activates networks for its look, smell, taste, feel, all linked together in association areas. Concepts are represented in these distributed ways.
And that famous phrase, neurons that fire together wire together.
Hebbian learning. Donald Hebb's idea. If one neuron consistently helps fire another, the connection between them strengthens.
Makes sense. Like paving a path.
Exactly. It underlies how we form associations, how neural assemblies representing ideas get built, and long-term potentiation, LTP, is a key way this happens physiologically.
LTP strengthening connections.
Basically, yeah. The brain reinforcing important pathways.
So it's all about these networks and how connections within them change.
Precisely. Complex stuff like learning emerges from coordinated communication between different networks and regions. The hippocampus talking to the neocortex, the amygdala influencing the hippocampus, the PFC guiding the basal ganglia. It's constant interaction.
Okay, so the brain is dynamic, networked. Let's talk more about how it changes. Neuroplasticity again.
Right, the engine of learning. The brain's ability to change structure and function based on experience.
And it happens throughout life.
Throughout life. It operates at different levels, from tiny synapses to whole networks. Your brain can change. You can learn new things.
What are the main kinds of changes?
We can think about structural plasticity, actual physical changes.
Like what?
Changes at the synapse, strength, number, size, changes in the neurons themselves, dendrites or axons growing or shrinking, those little dendritic spines changing shape, even changes in connectivity patterns. The white matter tracks.
Like learning to juggle actually changes brain structure.
Studies show exactly that, yeah. Changes in gray matter density and white matter structure.
Wow. And functional plasticity.
That's more about changes in how brain areas operate or how functions are mapped onto them, sometimes without big structural changes.
Like cortical remapping.
Exactly. Brain areas processing senses or controlling movement can expand, shrink, or shift based on experience or injury. Learn an instrument, the finger representation in your cortex might grow.
Or someone loses a limb.
The brain area for that limb might start responding to nearby areas, yeah. Or undamaged areas might take over functions after injury.
So what's driving this at the cellular level? Synaptic plasticity.
That's the bedrock. Changes in synapse strength based on activity. LTP and LTD are the big players.
LTP strengthens, LTD weakens.
You got it. LTP is the Hebbian fire together, wire together, strengthening. LTD weakens unused or less relevant connections, like pruning the garden.
So weakening connections is important too.
Absolutely. For refining circuits, maybe clearing out old stuff, keeping the network stable. It's a balance.
The stability-plasticity dilemma.
Exactly. How do you learn new things without messing up old memories? Synaptic plasticity is key, but there are other forms too, adding complexity.
And our specific experiences shape larger circuits.
That's experience-dependent plasticity, how learning and environment sculpt broader circuits, forming new synapses, synaptogenesis, pruning unused ones,
Dendritic spines changing.
remodeling, yeah, axons growing, even changes in myelination, the insulation around axons, affecting signal speed, all driven by experience.
Incredible. And adult neurogenesis, growing new brain cells.
Yeah, it continues in specific areas like the hippocampus, a remarkable form of structural plasticity.
And what do these new neurons do?
They seem important for hippocampus-dependent learning, maybe helping distinguish similar memories, adapting, consolidating, maybe even forgetting.
And things like exercise can boost it.
Exercise, enriched environments, active learning.
Yeah.
While stress and aging can suppress it, lifestyle matters.
Let's revisit cortical remapping. How does learning a skill change the brain map?
As you practice a skill, the motor cortex areas controlling those muscles reorganize. They might expand, reflecting more neural resources dedicated to that skill.
Like pianists having larger hand representations.
Exactly. Or after sensory changes like blind individuals reading Braille, their visual cortex might start processing touch information. It's profound adaptability.
And this plasticity continues throughout life, not just when we're young.
Definitely. Peak plasticity is in early development, sure, but significant plasticity remains in adulthood. Experience keeps shaping the brain.
Synaptic changes, spine remodeling, neurogenesis remapping.
All continue, enabling lifelong learning. As we age, plasticity might become less efficient, learning might take more effort, but the capacity for change absolutely persists.
Which is why staying active and engaged matters.
Crucial. Cognitive engagement, exercise, new challenges, they can all promote plasticity even in older adults.
Okay. Dynamic brain, constantly changing. How does knowledge actually get built? The journey of a memory.
Right. Memory is the persistence of that learning over time. Using the information later, it typically involves 3 stages.
Encoding, storage consolidation, and retrieval.
That's the classic model, yeah. Encoding is getting it in, storage and consolidation is keeping it there, retrieval is getting it back out.
So encoding first, what's happening there?
It's perceiving, processing, transforming information into a storable format. It involves attention. You have to notice it first.
And how deeply you process it matters.
Hugely. Just passively reading versus actively thinking about meaning, that affects the initial memory trace. It involves brain activity, triggers initial synaptic changes like LTP.
Then it needs to stick. Storage and consolidation.
Right. The initial trace is fragile. Consolidation stabilizes it, makes it durable, integrates it with what you already know.
Happens at different levels.
Yeah. Cellular consolidation is faster molecular changes at the synapse. Systems consolidation is slower reorganization or across brain regions, that hippocampus neocortex dialogue.
And sleep is vital for this.
Absolutely critical. The brain seems to use that offline time to replay and strengthen memories. Different sleep stages might consolidate different types of memory.
Deep sleep for facts, REM for skills and emotions.
Generally thought so, yeah.
Oh.
Even naps help. Sleep deprivation really messes up consolidation. And emotion boosts consolidation too. Amygdala signals importance.
Okay, stored and consolidated. How do we get it back? Retrieval.
Accessing the stored info, bringing it to consciousness or using it to guide behavior, often triggered by cues.
Reminders.
Exactly. Smells, places, words. And retrieval isn't just passive playback. It's reconstructive. We piece memories together.
And retrieving actually changes the memory.
It can strengthen it. That's the testing effect again. Actively pulling information out makes the pathway stronger.
Which is why just rereading isn't as good as self-testing.
Precisely. Retrieval requires effort, and that effort helps learning. It relies on networks involving the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, parietal regions.
And forgetting is often retrieval failure, not the memory being gone.
Often, yes. The info is there, but you lack the right cue to access it. Or interference from other memories blocks it.
We mentioned different memory types, declarative versus procedural.
Fundamental distinction. Declarative is explicit, conscious recall, knowing that. Facts, semantic, and events, episodic, relies heavily on the hippocampus initially.
Flexible, you can talk about it.
Right. Procedural is implicit knowing how. Skills, habits, Acquired gradually via practice, expressed through performance, often automatic, relies on basal ganglia, cerebellum, largely independent of the hippocampus.
Like learning to drive. Starts declarative, becomes procedural.
Perfect example.
How does the brain represent concepts, general knowledge?
That's a hot area of research. One idea is distributed representations grounded in sensory and motor experiences. Your concept of dog involves visual, auditory, maybe even tactile and motor areas.
Makes sense.
There's also the hub and spoke idea, distributed spokes, plus a central hub, maybe in the anterior temporal lobe, integrating everything.
Damage there can cause problems with concepts.
Yes, semantic dementia. But the exact nature and location of hubs are debated. Ultimately, it seems conceptual knowledge involves widespread networks and executive control from the PFC to access it flexibly.
Okay, brain structure, memory journey. What are the cognitive functions that really prop up learning? The pillars.
Right, the essential mental tools. Attention, working memory, and executive functions. All interconnected.
Attention, the gateway. Filtering distraction.
Absolutely. Selectively focusing. It's limited. We can control it consciously, or it can be grabbed by something surprising. We need it to bind features together for memory. Divided attention is bad for learning.
Relies on prefrontal and parietal areas.
Key control centers, yeah.
Then working memory. The mental workspace. Limited capacity.
Crucial bottleneck. If a task overloads it, learning suffers. That's the basis of cognitive load theory.
Right, managing the load. Intrinsic, extraneous, germane.
Exactly. Intrinsic is the inherent difficulty. Extraneous is bad design, confusing instructions, clutter. Germane is the good kind, effortful processing for understanding.
So good teaching minimizes extraneous, manages intrinsic.
To free up resources for germane load-making connections, building understanding, strategies like chunking, visuals, worked examples help, relies on PFC parietal regions.
And executive functions, the brain's manager.
The conductor, yeah. High-level control, inhibiting distractions, using working memory, being flexible, supports planning, problem-solving, self-monitoring.
Crucial for complex learning. Setting goals, managing attention.
Adapting strategies, heavily linked to the PFC, develops late into the 20s.
So attention, WMEF, all work together. Problems in one affect others.
Definitely. And younger learners need more support because these systems are still developing.
Got it. Now, what else influences learning? Modulators.
Yeah, learning isn't just cognitive. It's affected by internal states, external factors, emotion, motivation, stress, lifestyle, environment.
Emotion and motivation seem huge.
They are. Emotional events are remembered better attention boost, stronger consolidation via amygdala hippocampus links. Moderate arousal helps. Extreme negative emotion hurts. Positive environment is key.
And motivation, the drive.
Intrinsic motivation, internal interest is powerful. Extrinsic rewards can help too, especially for effortful tasks. Dopamine is central here.
The reward chemical.
Involved in reward prediction, motivation, driving effort. It modulates cognitive control in the PFC too. Feeling rewarded or finding value boosts learning.
What about stress? Chronic stress is bad.
Very bad for learning and memory. High cortisol levels negatively impact the hippocampus, amygdala, and PFC.
Impairs memory, increases anxiety, hurts executive function.
Pretty much sums it up. Leads to structural changes too. Low stress, supportive environments are vital.
Lifestyle. Exercise, diet, sleep.
Foundational. Exercise boosts neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, memory. Good nutrition provides building blocks, protects the brain. Bad diet impairs.
And sleep, indispensable for consolidation.
Absolutely. Optimizing exercise, nutrition, and sleep is basically a prerequisite for effective learning.
And the social context, learning with others.
Often very effective. Positive interactions boost motivation, understanding. Secure relationships foster safety needed for learning. Enriched environments promote plasticity. It all interconnects.
Okay, we know how the brain learns. How do we use this? Evidence-based strategies.
Exactly. Cognitive science has tested techniques that align with brain function, things we can all use.
Like retrieval practice, testing ourselves.
Super powerful. Actively recalling info strengthens memory much more than just rereading. Use quizzes, flashcards, summarize from memory, get feedback.
And spacing, don't cram.
Spaced repetition. Distribute learning over time. Forgetting a bit, then retrieving, strengthens the memory. Use spaced repetition software or schedules.
Interleaving, mixing things up.
Yeah, mixing practice of different but related skills or topics in one session. Better for long-term retention and transfer than blocking practice. Helps you see differences. Feels harder, but works better long-term.
Elaboration, making connections.
Actively processing by linking to existing knowledge. Explaining in your own words. Ask why. Generate examples. Use analogies. Deeper processing, better memory.
Dual coding, words and pictures.
Presenting info verbally and visually. Uses 2 pathways, increases recall chances. Pair explanations with visuals. Encourage creating visual notes.
At managing cognitive load, keep it simple.
Minimize extraneous load. Clear instructions, no clutter. Manage intrinsic load. Break it down, use examples. Optimize germane load. Encourage deep processing. Be mindful of working memory limits.
Can these translate to the classroom? Brain-based learning?
Yes, but carefully. Avoid neuromyths. Effective strategies leverage these principles. Positive climate, activity, active engagement, relevance, multiple modalities, feedback, chunking, spacing. They work because they align with brain science.
So, translating this science to practice, it's not always straightforward, is it?
No, it's challenging. There's a gap between controlled lab studies and messy, real-world classrooms.
Different levels of analysis, too. Cell versus cognition versus classroom.
Exactly. And the risk of oversimplification, or those neuromyths creeping in. We need better communication between researchers and educators.
More training for teachers on this.
Ideally, yeah, building neuroscience literacy.
So what are the opportunities? How do we bridge that gap?
Science should inform practice, not dictate it. Collaboration is key, researchers and educators working together.
Teacher-researcher partnerships.
Great idea. Focus on communicating robust core principles, plasticity, emotion-cognition link, cognitive load, retrieval spacing rather than isolated findings.
And testing things out.
Rigorously evaluating interventions informed by science in actual classrooms, iterative testing, and adaptation.
Wow. Okay, this has been an incredibly rich deep dive. Lots to take in about how our brains build knowledge.
It really is fascinating stuff.
Let's just quickly recap the big takeaways for everyone listening.
Sure. So the brain actively builds knowledge. It uses interconnected structures, and it's constantly changing through neuroplasticity.
And effective learning strategies work with those brain mechanisms.
Like retrieval practice, spaced repetition, managing cognitive load.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't forget the modulators emotion, motivation, stress, lifestyle. They had a huge impact.
For me, the big aha is really seeing learning not as passive absorption, but as this active process of engaging the brain, strengthening connections, making things retrievable.
And for you, listening,
Yeah.
these insights are practical. You can use them in your studies, your job,
Yeah.
just understanding anything new.
They inform your personal habits, your professional development, how you approach new information generally.
Absolutely.
So here's a final thought. We know neuroplasticity is lifelong. Our brains can keep learning and adapting.
Right up to the end.
So knowing that, knowing the power you have, what new skill, what new area of knowledge will you actively start exploring? Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.